The ability to remember is vital to our existence. Without memories of all different kinds, where would we be? In some cases, the consequences are short lived and somewhat minor, like a student that forgets to study for a test or someone that forgets to take their lunch to work. But in other cases, the inability to remember certain things can be life altering and even dangerous, like a person with dementia or Alzheimer's. They could forget not only the names and faces of those they love the most, altering completely these special relationships, but they could also forget to eat, forget to take life saving medication, forget to turn the stove off, forget to look both ways before crossing the street. The inability to remember certain things means someone with Alzheimer's may not know when they are in danger, and if they are, who they can trust and what they should do. But even healthy individuals not suffering from dementia are naturally prone to forgetfulness. We easily forget things. We have to intentionally try to remember things. Sometimes we need physical reminders, from something trivial like making a list of things you want to buy at the grocery store, to large memorials that remind us of something significant that happened in our country's past. We see God command the Israelites to do just this in Joshua chapters 3 through 5. Before Israel goes to war to take possession of the promised land, God miraculously holds back the flow of the Jordan River for them to cross the river on dry ground, as a way for them to know that He is in this battle with them. After this amazing miracle, God instructs them to gather stones for a memorial. Chapter 4, verse 20 says, "As for those 12 stones which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set them up at Gilgal. And he said to the sons of Israel, When your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, 'What are these stones?' Then you shall inform your children, saying, 'Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever." My first thought is, why on earth would the people need to build a memorial to remember such a miraculous event in their lives? And then I remember how forgetful I am. I am prone to do the same. It doesn't take me long to forget something significant God has done in my life. On the other hand, there are things I can't seem to forget. Usually, I can easily forget the positive, but struggle to forget the negative. For example, I'm more apt to remember the one negative comment someone made about me than the 10 positive things they said, or remember the one embarrassing thing I did instead of the 100 things I did well. Why? A couple of articles from Psychology Today, I think, explain well why we are more apt to remember the negative. They say, this is because negative experiences activate more activity in the brain's information processing center, particularly the amygdala, which prioritizes emotionally charged memories. Negative thoughts cling to your mind because your brain is built to protect you. In the tension between hardship and happiness, memory's emphasis tilts towards potential threats, not due to a lesser importance for joy, but because memory is vital for survival. God has created our brains as amazing complex organs. When something bad happens, our brain wants to hold on to that memory so we can be protected by remembering the danger. Unfortunately, that means our brain tends to give negative memories priority over positive ones, which means we may have to work harder to remember certain things. Unfortunately, we are prone to forget many things we really need to remember, which is why in the Bible, over and over again, we are commanded to remember what God has said, remember what God has done, remember who God is. For example, Psalm 105:5 says, "Remember the wondrous works that he has done, his miracles and the judgments he uttered." Why, though? Why is it so important to remember these things? We can see a couple reasons in the passage from Joshua. Verse 21 shows us that as we remember the past, we can teach and shape future generations that didn't see the miracle with their own eyes. We see this idea also in Psalm 78, which says, "For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they were to teach them to their children, so that the generation to come would know, the children yet to be born, that they would arise and tell them to their children, so that they would put their confidence in God and not forget the works of God, but comply with his commandments and not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not prepare its heart and whose spirit was not faithful to God." Like verse 7 says, remembering what God has done and sharing it with future generations helps them to be obedient and also build their confidence in God. We see another benefit to remembering in verse 8. Remembering the rebellion of the previous generations helps to avoid their mistakes and avoid continued rebellion and disobedience. This can apply to us on a very personal level also. Of course, we need to recognize and learn from the mistakes of others, but we also need to remember our own mistakes so as not to repeat them. This does not mean we should beat ourselves up about past failures that we have already brought before God and been forgiven for, but to learn from them and do better moving forward. In addition to teaching others and avoiding previous mistakes, remembering what God has done will strengthen our faith and make us bolder and able to be more confident in what lies ahead. Deuteronomy 7:17-18 says, "If you say in your heart, 'These nations are greater than I, how can I dispossess them?' You are not to be afraid of them. You shall remember well what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt." Israel was going to face some scary situations. And here Moses tells them to remember what God has done, because this would help them not to be afraid, but instead to be confident in what lies ahead. Remembering also makes us more grateful and brings joy and peace. Psalm 9:1 says, "I will give thanks to the Lord with all my heart. I will tell of all your wonders." An article from Southeastern Center for Faith and Culture says science shows that engaging in gratitude rewires neural pathways, combating anxiety. Each time we focus on God's faithfulness, we activate the brain's stress calming areas, strengthening a path toward peace. It's incredible how God, in His wisdom, designed gratitude and remembering to work together, not just spiritually, but physically. As we remember what God has done, the gratitude will come naturally and fear and anxiety will flee, leaving us with joy and peace. Remembering not only teaches others, helps avoid previous mistakes, strengthens our faith, and brings gratefulness, joy, and peace, but it also brings honor to God and it strengthens our relationship with Him. And of course, in order to be able to obey God today, we have to remember what He has taught in the past. There are many benefits to remembering who God is and what He has said and done. It is important to remember, but there are obstacles to remembering. Like we talked about earlier, we are naturally prone to forget. Another thing that can hinder our ability to remember like we should is pride. Deuteronomy 8:11 through 14 and 17 to 18a say, "Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments, his ordinances, and his statutes, which I am commanding you today. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, and you build good houses and live in them, and when your herds and your flocks increase, and your silver and gold increase, and everything that you have increases, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Otherwise, you may say in your heart, 'My power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth.' But you are to remember the Lord your God, for it is He who is giving you power to make wealth." Pride is a very dangerous thing, and one of the many dangers of pride is that it causes us to forget God. It creates a false sense of security in ourselves, in our power, in our strength, instead of remembering, relying on, and being grateful for God's provision, God's protection, and God's power. We need to do our best to avoid the pitfalls that will make us forget things that are vital to remember. Since we are naturally prone to forgetfulness and need to be intentional about remembering, what are some things we can do? Practically speaking, how can we combat this forgetfulness? Well, for one thing, like God commanded the Israelites, we could have our own memorial stones, so to speak. We can use some object to remind us of something God did or showed us. One object I have that serves as a memorial stone for me is a miniature replica of a house from Bogota, Colombia, that was given to me by a church I worked with on my first mission trip. When I look at that house, I am reminded of many things, including the fear I felt before going and the amazing peace I felt while I was there. In addition to using objects to remind us of things of God, we could also use pictures, music, and similar things. There's a particular song in my playlist that God spoke to me through before my first pacemaker surgery. It became the cry of my heart. I listened to it over and over again, even as they prepared me for surgery. It spoke of not understanding why God wasn't answering my prayers the way that I had hoped, but choosing to trust his character and his plan anyway. So when I listen to the song now, it is a reminder of God's power, presence, and perfect plan. Along with memorial stones, doing things that will keep God's written word in the forefront of our minds is helpful in remembering Him, like consistently reading, studying, and memorizing His word. Also, placing meaningful verses where you will see them regularly, whether framed on the wall, on a piece of paper sitting on your desk, or a screenshot on your phone, will also help combat forgetfulness. Another great way to remember something is to simply write it down. Keeping a journal of what God has shown you or done for you can serve as a very useful reminder of things that might otherwise be easily forgotten. Likewise, I've found that telling others the things God has done in my life may not only be helpful to them, but also to me, as it keeps those memories more vivid in my mind. Also, of course, participating in holidays and other activities like the Lord's Supper, which Jesus actually commanded us to do in remembrance of him, will help us to remember important things like Jesus' sacrifice for us. And last but not least, as my husband pointed out to me recently, sometimes to remember, we need to be still. The function of the Holy Spirit is to bring to remembrance. And God said, "Be still and know that I am God." So sometimes we need to make time to be quiet and let God remind us of who He is. Remembering is important, so important that we should put forth every effort to remember. Remember what God has said, remember what God has done, remember who God is.